Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Barry. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I love that, once again, everyone along that soldier dude, once again, one of Chris's buddies that died during that whole ordeal back in season 1. That guy's sister and her biker buds, I guess, turns out she's a motocross star. Her and the others are, they're all talking about, wait, and he was going to give Barry like $1,700 for a hot tub. Who says no to a hot tub right there? And then Fuchs is like, yeah. And they shoot Fuchs. I was like, what? And then the camera stayed on for a couple seconds. I was like, there's no way you're just going to casually kill him in the opening of this episode like that. But apparently not. He's still alive, which I love that he ends up being saved by some nearby, I think they're goat ranchers, I guess. And there's Anita, which I'm like, they're not married. They're just dating. You have a wife back, or girlfriend back in Chechnya, and it's like, I guess that's why he kind of loved the whole goat thing. It's like, oh, home away from home type of thing. And then he ends up getting called by Janice's dad, which is interesting. That actor, I was like, oh man, you've seen that actor in so many different things. I want to say the most recent thing I saw him in was Hellstrom on Hulu. Might be the most recent thing. There might be something more recent, but he's just one of that actors oh, I've seen you in stuff. I know you. I want to say that might be the most recent thing I've seen him in. I could be mistaken though. But I was like, oh, interesting bringing Janice's dad into the fold. But then he's kind of like, no, because I guess he's like, right, I'm going to leave the past behind. I feel content. I love that some of that Fuchs stuff seems like that's from a different episode, from a different show. Because when Fuchs is with Anita's dad, and he's like, oh, she thinks she might want you guys to become boyfriend or girlfriend. Which makes me wonder, like I said, did they get married? I don't think they did. They might have just been dating, but his girlfriend, his Etso at the very least, in Chechnya, is like, did she break up with you before you left? Because I'm like, that seemed interesting. It seemed like you were all about it. He's like, yeah, I'm trying, amigo, and stuff like that. I was like, this feels like such a weird sequence in this episode, because it felt like such a different show in that moment. Then Fuchs looked at the paper, and it was basically talking about Gene getting congratulated for helping out Barry, that story and everything, and that set him off to be like, oh, God has a plan and stuff, well, God sent me a sign, so I'm gonna act upon it. And he calls Janice's dad back up, so it's like, cool, so that's about to be put into motion. You have Barry getting called up by Sharon, Chris's wife, because she met up with Albert, who was trying to meet up with Barry, because he realized, because obviously they look at Fuchs as the Raven, that he's the one responsible for everything going down, but then it's like, no, he's not well-trained enough. And then Albert's like, right, a killing machine, well-trained, well, I knew one. So he's trying to find Barry, then he finds out, wait, Barry's actually an actor? That's crazy. I'm like, oh boy. Because I was worried about, oh man, this is a trap. The fact is Sharon's bringing you, I was like, Sharon's bringing you here and Albert's going to be waiting for it. I guess, in retrospect, I guess I shouldn't be too surprised with the twist at the end, because if you notice, what did Sharon do? She didn't say oh, Albert's going to be there. She was like, oh, I'm holding this charity thing, but I guess she implied other people would be there, but the fact is, it didn't seem like, because she had suggested to Albert, oh, we should get together sometime, but I feel like she would have mentioned that, even hit Albert up, or you would have expected Albert, I guess in retrospect, looking back, it just felt like something was already off about it, so I thought that was interesting. Another aspect of this, staying on Barry for an instant, he was so happy and everything. He's like, oh, I love you. And he's like, oh, no, I didn't mean I love you. I just went through a breakup and I was just, yeah. He's like, okay. Oh, I thought you were going to hang up first. He's like, okay, bye, I'll hang up. I love the awkwardness of it. It's right, he's trying to, do whatever he can to help Sharon, because he's avoided being around her since Chris's death, because obviously that rocked him for such a long time, but also shows how much of an asshole you are that, I mean, he was dealing with it still, but even then, it's kind of yeah, you haven't really drowned in the sorrow of doing that. You're not even necessarily 100% beating yourself up from all those people, Bolivians, well, not even the Bolivians, because it was, God, what was her face? Last season, the person that NoHo Hank had an issue with Cristobal getting close to, her and her people, and mainly the Chechens, is who Barry ended up massacring the season 2 finale. But Esther, that was her name, right? It just clicked in my head. he hasn't really beat himself up too much about that. So it's just interesting, like how you do kind of let so much stuff slide by, like the terrible stuff you've done. What stays with you, what you seem to kind of not hold yourself too high, and don't hold too much against yourself for. It's just interesting to think about. But so I guess he saw this as an opportunity to reach out to Sharon, be good, make sure, check in on her, because he hasn't really checked in on her and Theo. So it's like, right, chance to kind of get close to them and also make sure they're okay. Kind of his way of making up for the fact that he killed Chris. But I love that when he's in the, he's doing text-to-speech, and I love it so much. And he's like, yeah, sorry about threatening to break into your boss's house, taking pictures of her while she's sleeping, and just everyone else is just staring at him, because I'm like, yeah, that's it. He has no social awareness, and then like some of the conversation is like, oh yeah, so side note, that I kind of have issues with text-to-speech where like it never stays that long in this. I mean, I guess it's like, it got I'd say like 85% of that message right, and obviously it included some of the conversations he was having with other people. But I love that whole scene, and just Sally's reading part of the conversation, and Lindsay's like, you dodged a bullet there, which Sally's she was suggesting like, oh, maybe they can pitch Jocelyn to someone else, which I'm like, oh my god, that's, once again, it's just like, yeah, like getting behind the scenes of stuff like that, of like, yeah, someone would like, oh, if your show gets canceled, you're like, right, I'm gonna try and find it a new home, maybe put it on some streaming service, or maybe even make our own streaming service, which that's a whole conversation within just the streaming wars that exist today. It's just funny. But I love that Lindsay's trying to get one of those things, and she's like so happy about it, and some lady like randomly grabs her box, and she's almost like, get the fuck off. I was like, what? I guess it's like, right, you're waiting on a long line, and like, oh, someone's got one, and someone walking by, but I'm like, why would you just grab someone's random box like that? That's weird. Innuendo. Didn't mean that. So I thought that was interesting. And I love Mitch being this recurring character throughout the episode, where literally all these different characters are going to him for advice. Sally's going to him advice about stuff, and then there's NoHo Hank. And I love that he's like, yeah, the guy didn't tell you that he was married or straight. Seems like a lot of red flags, and you might have like lucked out in the end for things to kind of go that way. He's like, hey man, like we should run that. He's like, I'm franchising this, and we should like run this together. No whole thing, because like, oh, just give me a couple days to think about it. It's like, okay. And I think that lady came in next year. It's like, okay. And that's when I was like, wait, it's because like everyone's opening up to him, and then the next lady after Hank was like, oh my god, I talked to my daughter, and the guy's like, and I'm like, oh shit, everyone doesn't come there just for the food. Everyone opens up to this dude. He's literally, I was like, I love this bit. I hope we get to see more Mitch in the future. I love that so much. Is it Chad or JT? Was it Chad? Is it JT and Chad Go Deep, or Chad and JT Go Deep, the podcast? I've only heard like part of their podcast with Jordana Brewster, but I mainly, I've come across a podcast before, but I mainly like heard them on Tiger Belly. But Mitch looks like, I want to say it's Chad, right? Or is it JT? I'm always conflating names. Once again, I'm not well versed in them, but it was like he kind of reminded me of that. So that dude, so I couldn't shake that the entire time. Nevertheless, I also love that Barry got advice from him too, being like, yo, dude, you probably want to like zoom in. He's like, yo, I know some buddies, like when I went to a 10-year reunion, he said one was doing something, and then the other one tried to get me to listen to these old dads on YouTube rapping, and it was like, it was fucked or something like that. He's like, so you might want to zoom in, like dip your toe in. Nah, dude, trust me, you want to dip your toe in. And he was super right to say like, oh, dip your toe in. He was like, yeah, you didn't listen. That's the problem. Mitch gave amazing advice throughout the episode to everyone, because he was the one suggesting that Sally might not want to work with Banshee anymore just because of all the like shit she had to go through with her show. And so that lady who's in that new Showtime show, is pitching her like, oh, that Three Medusas show or whatever, and it's like, oh, you can make the show go from yeah to yeah. I'm like, what the fuck is this conversation that her and Lee, and it's like, oh no, Sally can do yeah, but she can also do no, and she can do It's like, okay, we could do, and smiles, and then like does a big, like, I'm like, what is this? So now Sally's going to be a writer on the show, I think. As I write, get in that, do that, then that gives you an opportunity to audition and get, because she wants to be pitching other shows and stuff like that. But it's like, right, at least this will get you, some work and I'm sure some credits and stuff like that in the long run. So I love that whole situation. So there's that. And then honestly, the whole freaking, well, I love that Jermaine and Nick are so busy doing the recording, and I love he's like, I guess because Nick's doing this is what's happening, so you do the sound effects for it. And he's like, okay, and Jesse Jackson, and he pauses, and Jermaine's like, no, go ahead, do Jesse Jackson. And he pauses because he's like, I'm not about to, I don't want to touch that. And I love that they like all that was happening, and the guys didn't even realize. I mean, once again, like so much shit happens that everyone's so oblivious of. Like when NoHo Hank and his guy tried to shoot up Barry, when they tried to kill Barry before, Sally completely did not notice the condition of his room when she was in there with him at one point in time. So it's like everyone's completely oblivious of everything that goes around. And so I love all of that. But also, like I said, that sequence was so wild. I love that they just rolled up and they're like, whoa, is this the guy? I think that's the guy. Oh, that Goulet guy. And I was like, Barry, I guess maybe he caught that, maybe he didn't. So they're driving. That whole sequence. I love, like, oh, you're looking in the mirror in the car. And you see, like, the truck hit the guy on a motorcycle. Then the other guy's, like, shooting at Barry. Barry kind of ducks down, runs into him. He crashes into the car. And there's a nearby mailman just staring. I'm like, okay. I love that this was such a public thing. I'm like, what the fuck? That whole sequence ran on for so long, too. And then I love the bike sequence where they're on the highway. There's backed up traffic. They're just popping off. I love that guy's, like, he's shooting. And he's like, he's like, take it. He holds it out. The guy, like, tries to grab it, hits it. It hits the ground, shoots. So I don't know if it shot anyone in that car. I'm sure a lot of those cars are empty. If they're not, I'd assume some of those had to be real and not just, like, special effects. I mean, I'd love to see the behind the scenes on, like, how much of those were just, I feel like some of that had to be, like, CGI'd cars or something like that. But regardless, maybe they were just real cars, too. I don't know. I don't get too caught up in the details of that. But I was like, oh, the fact is that shot went off. I'm like, but we didn't, because those cars were definitely empty because no one reacted. No one was getting out of their cars. So it's like, yeah, those are just completely empty cars, but it's just for the sake of the scene. But like, yeah, one of the gun went off and like a bullet flew into a nearby car. I'm like, probably. And the other guy like crashed his bike, landed in another car. So there's that. Then there was the whole sequence of the guy at the car dealership trying to sell a car. Barry runs inside because the bike is super messed up. The biker, I think it's the sister, which I think she was the last one. She gets on top of the roof and she's starting to shoot down. People are like, oh my god, the dude who runs the car dealership ends up coming out with a shotgun. Pow! Shoots her. Then shoots her again when she gets up and I'm like, oh my god, is anyone hurt? And he just Barry casually walks away. I'm like, what the fuck was this sequence, dude? It was sick as shit, but I was like, did they not think about the public? I mean, I guess they were wearing helmets and stuff, but still, like, weren't they wearing stuff that could identify them? I'm like, this whole sequence was so goddamn public. Like, how do you sweep that under the rug? And just Barry just casually walks away, makes it to Sharon's place, and is like, hey, and then he pieces it together, like looking at the photos and stuff, realizing like, oh, home dude from season 1, his sister is the one that came after me, and then he knows there's a card. I was like, the Goulet car. I was like, wait, did you have that on you? What's that? I was like, oh, fuck. And he looks at Sharon, and he's like, what did you put in the sauce? She's like, die, motherfucker. He starts foaming at her mouth. I was like, oh, shit. And now my question is, when did Fuchs get to her? It had to be before this episode. So even when she was meeting with Albert, she had probably already met with him. So, like, the entire time we kept seeing Sharon throughout the episode. I mean, not unless that's supposed to show, like, while Fuchs was doing everything with Janice, talking to Janice's dad, that he came back to L.A. Because they're only, like, 20 minutes or 20 miles outside of L.A. Where he was. So could it be a situation of, like, after he took the truck and bounced, he ended up going to see Sharon. So maybe she was, like, legitimately trying to meet up with him and everything was kosher, or she was setting all that up. Once again, that's why I'm like, maybe that, like, the fact is that Albert thing didn't come into conversation, made me go like, oh, because Albert's like, oh, we should meet up, and she's like, okay, yeah, sure. It's like, she probably rewatching with that context, you'll probably be able to read it on her face, like, oh, she had this plan. So, but, I doubt Barry's dead. He's probably going to, like, be able to, like, probably crawl it off. And does that mean he's going to end up having to kill Sharon? Because dude, Fuchs is bringing everyone out the woodwork. Now, Sharon came back for this, which I think is so awesome because, just saw her plate, obviously, Fear the Walking Dead's currently airing season finales next week. So it's like, right, she's just literally was in this week's episode of, Fear the Walking Dead playing Grace. So I just think that's, I just think the timing of that's always interesting, but I'm like, holy shit. And she's not even the only one. There's probably still people left from that. There's at least one guy left from that. I mean, there's actually a lot more, because there's 3 that are dead. Once again, I'm assuming it's Home Dude's sister that's dead, but Home Dude that was in the car with the giant gun, he's still alive, so he could be an issue. The mom and son, the son got shot, but they still could be an issue. Now Janice is dead. Now, I was about to call her Emma because that's her character's name in Legacy. Legacies. But now it's like, dude, Fuchs has brought everyone out that, like, has some connection to Barry, that Barry either killed someone important to him or whatnot. So, yeah. That's definitely going to be interesting to see where next episode takes us with all this. I'm very excited to see. I should also go back and rewatch a lot of the episodes Bill Hader directed, because this is another episode he directed. I was like, it's just, I feel like he goes balls to the wall with episodes he ends up directing. So, I mean, it's just a very balls to the wall show, but it feels like those are probably the most, like, because I think it was like episode 5 of last season, the Ronnie Lily episode was the one that he directed as well. I think that's one that kind of gets the most love too, I think. I came across something recently that was kind of calling that, like, the best episode of Barry, which I love that episode too, so I don't know if that's the general consensus across a board when it comes to people who watch the show, but either way, I am so excited to see where the next episode takes us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.